Hi there, everyone, and welcome to today's University Business Web Seminar. It's great to have you all with us. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Kurt Ozzie-Durley. I'm the Web Seminar Editor here at UB, and I'll be your moderator. The title of our event, as you see here, is Making the Transition to Remote Learning, and is being brought to you through the generous support of our sponsor for today, Microsoft. First, before we get started, as attendees are still coming in here, a bit about our topic for today and what we'll be taking a look at. As concern grows around COVID-19, many higher ed leaders are making the difficult decision to close schools and transition to entirely remote or online learning. To help make the transition successful, Microsoft has created resources, training, and how-to guides to help support IT educators, staff, and students. Today we'll be learning how to leverage Microsoft Teams to support contingency planning at any institution, providing a digital learning platform and enterprise collaboration solution for remote learning or working from home. We're looking forward to an interesting presentation, plus live Q&A here, so do stay tuned. We'll get started in just a minute or two here. First off, though, just some quick housekeeping. First item, as it says here, if you need tech support at any time, you can use the chat panel at the right side of your screen there. Just select the name of our event producer and host, Jason York, and let him know if you're having any difficulties. He'll be able to help you out there. Also, second item on this slide, if you have any audio problems, or if you prefer to listen privately, we'll post the phone number and access code that you can use in that chat window at the right. You can dial those to get audio access at any time here. If you have a question for our speaker today, please feel free to use the Q&A panel. As it says here, the third item on the slide, Q&A is the bottom right-hand corner of your screen there. Just make sure it's set to all panelists, and we'll get to the questions at the end. So feel free again, to ask a question at any time. Just type it in the Q&A, not the chat. That's reserved for tech support. If you have a question, enter it in the Q&A bottom right-hand corner. Speaking of questions, last item on the slide here, we are commonly asked about accessing the content of the presentation, either the slides or the recording. And people often ask us if it'll be available later, and yes, the answer is yes. Everyone who registered or attended here today will be getting a follow-up email later on with links to where you can find the recording. If you want to share it, go back over it. We'll also make the slides available. I know our speaker has some great resources and links contained in there, so you'll be able to access those later on. Don't worry about that. Okay, so with that, on to our presentation here. Today, our speaker, we're fortunate to have with us, Mani Sandhu. He's Microsoft Teams Engineering for Education there at Microsoft, and he's going to walk us through some tips and best practices about using Microsoft Teams and how to make this transition to remote learning that a lot of institutions are going through right now. So with that, Manny, it's great to have you. I'll turn it over to you. Welcome to our webinar.
Yes, Kurt, thank you very much for having me. A little bit about myself before we go on. Mani Sandhu, Microsoft Teams Engineering with a focus on education. So given the current climate that we're in, all of our team is focusing on working with educational institutes on how best they can leverage Microsoft Teams, both from a remote learning perspective, but also from a work at home perspective, given that some locations are going into mandatory quarantine. We have a lot to cover today, so I apologize if I go a little bit fast. We'll make sure you have a list of references and resources after the fact. I also do want to encourage questions through that Q&A portion of the meeting. We are going to allocate a lot of time for questions, given again, the climate that we're in. We want to make sure we're able to address your needs and concerns that you have. So this is our agenda. First off, what is Microsoft Teams? We're going to talk about that, how to use Microsoft Teams in higher education, We'll touch very briefly on the administration part of it. So how do you enable it? How do you govern it? What are some of the rules that we have to consider before making this service available? We'll discuss how we use Teams for remote lectures or classes or small groups. And then at the end, we'll have a number of resources available for working from home. Microsoft Teams is the productivity hub that's part of your Office 365. It has a number of components that are associated with it. The main one is the meetings capability, so being able to join a meeting. We have chats, so one-to-one, one-to-many chat enablement that we can have in there. Phone calls, whether it be voice over IP calling or actually connecting your traditional PBX phone system into Microsoft Teams, whether the calls be voice over IP voice calls or whether we do video conferencing with one-to-one or one-to-many individuals, that capability is there. Being able to have a single source of truth with files and that collaborative workspace is also a critical component of Microsoft Teams. Microsoft Teams has an app store. We are a platform, so we bring in a number of education plus other specific applications to reduce context switching and increase productivity within our platform. So whether you're using Kaltura, whether you're using RSpace, or a number of other applications, we have an app for that. And if we don't have an app for it, with a number of APIs that are available that allow you to plug in your line of business applications directly into the Teams environment. Really critical at this time is the fact that Teams and Microsoft Office 365 are globally available, with the notable exception of Venezuela, Cuba, North Korea, and some of those countries. You can access Teams everywhere in the world. We have a number of languages that we engage in as well. So whether your campus is whether your main campus is in the United States and you have remote campuses, or whether you leverage international students overseas during this time, we can accommodate that. Really, the biggest question I get asked when I speak to individuals is, okay, you've explained what Teams is. How do I use Teams? And there are 7 major use cases for Microsoft Teams in higher education. Now, I say major because every time I talk to individuals, they're always coming up with cool and innovative ways of how they want to use Teams. But the 7 major ones are listed on your screen. Consider staff to be administratively. Instead of leveraging and relying heavily on email, how do you have that collaborative work environment through Microsoft Teams? And that's generally the first workload that most institutions begin to take off with. The second pillar is teaching and learning. That's really the purpose of this, is how do you leverage a digital learning platform that is Microsoft Teams to complement your existing investments in technology and your investments in your learning platforms, but provide students that new way of engaging. When I speak to faculty members, their biggest concern is, hey, my students are used to coming to my class at Friday morning from 10 to 11 to take my course. With this current situation and us going to remote learning, I don't know how to keep them engaged. I don't know whether they are able to join the class at this time, whether they have family obligations or other things that they need to deal with. With Teams, they're really more comfortable expanding in that space. Faculty, through research communities or professional learning communities, students through student clubs, student organizations, ad hoc study groups, they can leverage Teams from that collaborative space. Research, first-line worker, or generally your shift worker, and healthcare make up the last 3 use cases in Microsoft Teams. Our journey today is going to be 4 pieces, right? We're going to start with, if you never have had any experience with Microsoft O365, where do you get started? We'll go into some governance components. Then we'll go into some automation conversations to really understand how do you best automate this. And then lastly, we'll talk about the delivery piece of this. Enabling Teams. The first consideration that we need to do is we need to make sure everybody has an identity in Azure AD. After they have an identity, we need to make sure the components that make up Office, Microsoft Teams, such as SharePoint, such as Office Groups, such as Exchange Online, we need to make sure that they are enabled and they are configured correctly. For institutions that leverage Google in their environment, whether you Google Mailbox or Google Classrooms, don't fear, that link on the screen is how we can connect to Google Classrooms, what the interoperability looks like, what the limitations are, etc. Once everybody has the identity and we have the necessary components set up, the next phase we need to do is enable the licensing. Now, there's a number of different licenses, which I'm not going to be talking about, but fast and short, if you go into the link on the screen, we can make sure how to assign student licenses to the students and then faculty and staff licenses to all your faculty and staff within your organization. The next step really is a two-step process. It's client distribution as well as readiness and training. One really critical component I want to highlight and emphasize is Teams is available on many platforms, regardless of what your choice is. So if you choose to use a PC or choose to use a Mac or Linux, there's a client for you. Whether you're on an iPhone or an Android, there's the clients available through those app stores. Even from a web browser perspective, if you use Chrome, Edge, Firefox, Safari, we can work in these platforms. So regardless of who your clients are and how they choose to, which ecosystem they're a part of, Teams can be a part of that. The next component is once we distribute the client, or we send a message to say, hey, go get the client on the device or platform of your choosing, really is training and readiness, right? We don't want to have a negative first touch experience. We want to be able to articulate the value of leveraging Teams, showing people how to use Teams. At the end of this presentation, and as the content gets distributed, there's a number of links that I'll provide to help IT administrators as well as educators on the resources that are available for us to help them. Now, once we have the fundamentals in place, we really need to make sure Teams as a service is available. For the purpose of this conversation, we're going to be looking at a lot of rapid deployment type conversations. So the particular line item that's circled is team creation, and then we'll touch very briefly on the number of policies that we can do to support Teams as a service within your institution. By default, everybody in your organization can create a team. Now, as an IT administrator, you have the ability to restrict who can create a team. It is best practice in higher education to allow everybody to create a team while providing some governance pieces in play. Governance pieces such as a naming convention. So being able to add a prefix or a suffix at the end of the entered team name to clearly identify that it was manually created. By implementing a custom block word list, disallowing up to 5,000 words from being used as part of that team name. So whether it's security, rostering, provost, chancellor, president, we can block those types of words. And then lastly, to minimize bloat, we have an expiration policy, which will allow those teams to be removed on a regular type basis. Now, if you look at the screen here, you'll see two different screenshots of a similar experience. On the left-hand side, if the individual has the ability to create a team, they'll get a nice purple button that says Create Team. On the other screen, that purple button doesn't exist. And if you do restrict the creation of teams, a couple things that can potentially go awry here is you're going to force people to create help desk tickets or reach out to IT to say, how do I do this? How do I leverage this? And that's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is people say, well, I can't use this service, and then they bring up another service, so causing shadow IT and data loss and through those avenues there. Once you have teams enabled and you have the basic governance in play, there is a number of policies that you can restrict or enable to define the experience. Whether you want students to chat, whether you want them to create meetings, whether you want them to have the inline translation functionality, whether you want them to have certain applications within their team's environment, all of these are policies that we have within Teams. Now, I don't want to make it overwhelming. I understand we want to be in, get things out as quick as we possibly can. So the best practice really is there is a set of default global policies. We want to set them to be the most restrictive, and then we create additional policies for a smaller set of users to enable these features and functionalities. Policies can be applied to an individual user, they could be applied to a set of users, or you can change the global policies to apply to everyone. Now that we've turned on Teams, we've applied the licenses, the dependent services, we've enabled Teams as a service, we have some governance rules in place, we have some policies, we really need to think about how do we get Teams out there. The easiest way is allowing somebody to go into the Teams client and say, create a team. When an individual creates a team, they are presented with 4 options of which teams to create. The one we're going to be focusing on is the one on the left, so the class team type. The class team type is designed for classroom delivery. The advantage of that is it has a certain attribute that defined with that team that hides the membership of the team for anybody who's not a part of that team. So that aligns to the FERPA compliancy piece of it. We don't publish the email associated with it. There's a number of education-specific tools such as gradebook and assignments and quizzes and class insights to show you student engagement within that virtual the virtual classroom that aren't available in the other team types. This is an important time to mention that each team can contain up to 5,000 members within that team. So generally speaking, the scalability of each team won't be an issue. Each team is generally made up of a class. So whether you have physics section 1, physics section 2, it's your choice on whether you want to combine the sections into a singular class or whether you choose to have different teams for each one of those sections. Now, once an educator has created the team, there's a number of ways of bringing students into the team. While you can manually add individual student email addresses to the team, that's generally not advised unless you have a small group that you're working with. As you start getting into really anything over 10, there's a number of ways that we can do some sort of automation in this space. So you can send the link via email to the student, say, hey everybody, please join this team, and students can click on it. We have an option with a team called Join Code. So as somebody launches the team site, they will get an opportunity to join an existing team. They can join code and are automatically brought into it. Or if there is an underlying duplication list or a stream that matches the membership of the team, of that class, you can add that, and then all of those members will be added in. These are self-managed, and I would really classify them as a real short-term way of managing the team. So if you needed to get up rapidly, those are some of the ways that you can do. Long-term, there are automated tools that we have available, which we will get into. There are 3 automated tools that I want to make sure that we highlight and articulate. The first one is called School Data Sync. School Data Sync is a set of tools or processes that Microsoft has defined which work by connecting to your SIS, your Student Information System, and creating teams based on roster information. So whether we use the OneRoster API or we use CSV files, depending on your SIS, we can take that information, create an automatic flow. From that flow, ensure that the team is created, the rostering is added, as well as maintained as part of the life cycle of the team. So if students choose to drop a course or students are added later into the course, the faculty or educators don't have to worry about that component. It's automatically taken care of. The other beautiful piece about SCS is there's a life cycle approach to it. So we are able to create a team. We are able to assign students that will go into a holding pen. It gives time for the educator to set up the team, their channel structure, their apps that they want to use. They want to upload their documents. They're allowed to do that. And then they can activate the team, which will then bring the students into the team. And at the end of the semester or quarter, however you're scheduled, we have the ability to then archive the team, rename the team, and then remove individuals from that team, and then start that process again. It's a wonderful process. For individuals that are our administrators that have want a bit more flexibility, they can also leverage PowerShell to do creating of teams, adding members to teams, removing individuals from teams, or Graph API, which can also do things like add applications into a team and a number of other tools that are available through the Graph or REST API perspective. So that's really the automation. So we've gotten to all of that. Now we're going to talk about delivery. And when we talk about delivery, in a remote learning world, we're really talking about effective online meetings. And we don't look at a meeting from a singular point in time perspective. We look at a meeting from a life cycle approach. So before the actual meeting, during the meeting, and then after the meeting, how do we need to look at each parts of those life cycles? Before the meeting, what we want to do is once we've created the class, we want to be able to schedule the meeting. Now we can schedule the meeting right through Microsoft Teams. We can schedule it through the calendar view within Microsoft Teams. We can assign it to a class or a channel within the team, which will automatically invite everybody who's a member of that team to that particular lecture that we are hosting. In Microsoft Teams, we do have the ability to define who are presenters and who are attendees. Obviously, attendees will have a limited rights within the meeting. So we do say part of the before piece of the online lecture is we want to make sure that you validate who are presenters, who is allowed to mute people, who's allowed to unmute people, who's allowed to present content and turn on their webcam and whatnot, versus who is there to consume the information, only unmute themselves, and some of those limited restrictions. So we want to make sure we have those in place. And then lastly, I would say most importantly, is we want to be able to make sure that you're connecting correctly. And that means preparing your device. So if you're sharing your webcam, making sure your cam is on and it's working. If you're leveraging a piece of hardware, you want to make sure the microphone is set up and you can hear everybody. Now, during the meeting is similar to how we are in an online meeting. With Microsoft Teams, you can share your desktop, you can share a PowerPoint presentation. What also we have within Microsoft Teams is an infinite whiteboard canvas. So multiple people can be on this whiteboard and they can be brainstorming and troubleshooting scenarios that are part of that. In the next slide, I talk a little bit about the poll capability. But as you would expect any online meeting solution to do, we can record the meeting and then you can go back to those recordings afterwards. And then post is really for accommodation, right? So those individuals who missed a part of the content or who couldn't attend live, how do we allow them to review the recording capability? How do we allow them to ask questions within a collaborative forum without having to go to a predefined office hours, without having to wait till next week's lecture or next next class's lecture to ask their questions. So that's the life cycle approach. We really have a lot of inclusive tools to support the meeting capability within Microsoft Teams. The first one is blur background. So that really blurs the content behind you to allow focus on you as a lecturer. So whether you have a messy bedroom behind you, or whether you have a whiteboard with some sensitive information, by turning on blurred background, you're focusing on the individual, yourself, within frame. The other piece we have within Microsoft Teams is live captioning. Now, whether an individual is in a noisy place and they need to read what's being said, or individuals who are English as a second language speakers, they can turn this functionality on to then read and follow along with what's being said in the meeting. So these are live captionings. As Teams has an app store, there's a number of ways to make sure students are engaged with the lecture. In this example here, we have a third-party tool called Poly, and Poly is a polling system, right? So being able to gauge, are you getting this? Did you capture that? Are there any questions? You can have students chatting on the side with TAs monitoring the chat to answer any questions, or you can leverage tools like Poly to put up a poll and see, are they actually understanding the content that you are delivering? And really one of the last and I would say most important pieces is every time you do a recording, a meeting recording in Microsoft Teams, we save that information to our backend service called Microsoft Stream. Microsoft Stream provides a searchable transcription for the recording. So in this screenshot here, we're going back and watching the recording. The closed captioning is the transcription that was created. But if I didn't want to watch a 1 hour lecture, I can click on the search button right beside the closed caption button and do keyword searches. If I want to know about quantum mechanics, I can type in quantum mechanics, and it will show me all the parts of the video time-stamped to where the term quantum mechanics was listed. And I can click on those parts, those key timestamps, and it'll jump me to those parts of the video to help me in that space. So whether it's somebody going back and who missed the lecture, or whether it's somebody going back to do revisions for exams, we're providing them a way to jump to the information that they actually need. Now, while Teams is a digital learning platform, it provides meetings, it provides chat and files and applications and tasks and videos and assignments, and we integrate very well with Office 365. So being able to co-author a document through Teams with version control behind it, we understand that institutions have investments in other meeting platforms, and we're okay with that. In this example, we'll talk about if your institution has invested with Zoom as a meeting platform, that's okay. Meetings can take place through Zoom. Teams is still going to be of value to complement that existing investment through Zoom by having that digital learning platform, that mobile-first experience, be able to ensure that you can engage students who are having a hard time adjusting to this remote learning, making sure that, hey, if you have a sick child or you have an elderly responsibility of another individual, and you can't make the lectures at the times that we say, we want to give you an avenue to go on your device, watch the meeting, ask the question. So that to us is a complementary solution there, regardless of what you choose. For individuals that choose to do meetings within Microsoft Teams, we have a wealth of accessibility. We have a wealth of feature sets that can complement that. But also, if you have an investment with other platforms, where we can leverage it. And fun fact, just really specifically talking about Zoom and WebEx, some of the bigger ones in the space there, Zoom, both Zoom and WebEx have an app inside Microsoft Teams, which allows you to start or schedule meetings within Teams to join to those meeting platforms as well. Another real big investment piece that institutions have is with their LMS. So whether they have Blackboard or Canvas or D2L or Moodle or Sakai, they are not going to get off of that. And really, a real common question that our organization gets asked is Teams an LMS? And our answer is Teams is going to meet you where you are. There are institutions who are exclusively using Teams as their LMS. There are organizations that say, no, we've invested heavily in our LMS, and this is what our authoritative truth is. And we say, no problem. LMS, you can take care of the assignments capability. You can take care of a few other pieces. But what LMSs don't provide, again, is that digital platform for continual engagement and that app flexibility, some along that. So really, we do have a play, regardless of what your situation is, whether you choose to be all in on Microsoft Teams and leveraging our education components, leverage our meeting components, or whether you use third party, or whether you choose to say LMS is where we want to invest our time and space, that's not a concern. And in fact, earlier this week, we are really partnering up with the big LMSs, and this blog article came out, which are saying within these 5 LMSs, you can create Teams meetings within the LMSs. So if we use Canvas as an example, if you're setting up in a meeting within a Canvas calendar, one of the drop downs is, if you configure it, is make this a Teams meeting. So the Teams meeting link will get sent to students. They can join through the Teams UI. They will get the feature sets such as turning on live captioning. They will be able to have that whiteboard experience. They'll, if it was recorded in Teams, they'll be able to go back to it, see the recording, searchable transcription, all of those components that go along with it. So the big ones: Canvas, Blackboard, D2L Brightspace, ITS Learnings, and Schoology. I do expect potentially a bit more coming in this space. We're all partnering together to make sure we are driving towards the right direction in this time. Now, we focused heavily on the remote learning capability, right? There's a lot we can do from remote learning, but we're missing a large population, if you will, is working from home. So there are a number of blog articles which I will include as part of the resources on how to run effective meetings through Microsoft Teams, tips and tricks on how to work from home in a remote learning, a remote work from home scenario for those individuals who aren't used to working from home. I mean, me myself, I've been working from home for 7 years. I have a rhythm, but there's some folks who really just, it's new to them. They're not, how do I stay engaged? How do I leverage technology to make sure that they know I'm working or that I'm available to listen to them if we need to listen to them? So we'll include a number of the blog articles. I will include a couple of videos as well, so you can go and learn on tips and tricks from working from home, how to run effective meetings through Microsoft Teams. This is the resource slide. I'm not going to cover this. I want to really open it up to any questions that the individuals have and things that I can go back and reiterate on, because I'm sure we covered a lot of topics in this space, but I want to make sure I can go back and reinforce certain fundamentals.
Sure. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Manny. I know you covered a lot of ground in a short amount of time there. Yes, and to our audience, as Manny mentioned, there's some links and resources available in here. Just click back on them. And again, everyone will get access to these slides, so you can go into them and access additional resources if you'd like to learn more. They have a variety of things available here. And again, we are recording we're commonly asked if we're recording, and we'll make the slides or the recording available. Everyone who registered will be getting follow-up email with that if you want to go back over anything. And also, if you do have any questions here for Manny about Microsoft Teams, how that works, higher ed applications, or anything like that, again, another reminder, you can just enter it in the Q&A, bottom right-hand corner there. Let's see.
Kurt,
Sure.
I'll start things off. I got a private message in. Can you talk a little bit more about Zoom and Teams meetings? Absolutely. I mean, Zoom is a platform in which individuals can meet virtually. They have a number of tools that are available, very similar to the ones that we have in Microsoft Teams. Where the real differences lie is meetings is one of the components that make up a virtual classroom scenario. I'm going to just bring up this slide again to really articulate what I mean by that. Is if you look at what compiles a digital learning platform, being able to have meetings is one component, being able to chat with your professor or your peers around certain topics, being able to share files, co-authoring, version controls, leveraging the apps that are within the App Store, such as Kaltura, Qbot, being able to bring in resources through that concept of a digital learning platform. That's what really makes Teams different. Within Teams, though, from our App Store, we have a Zoom app. So you can install the Zoom app inside of Teams. When you install that Zoom app, it will, on the left-hand side, what we call our left pane, you'll see an icon there that says Zoom. And from that Zoom app, it will ask you to log in. So you log into your Zoom account. Then from there, you'll have a dashboard of these are all the Zoom meetings that you have scheduled. From there, you can click on join Zoom meeting, and it'll launch. If you don't have the Zoom app, it'll launch the browser with the Zoom meeting. If you have the Zoom app, it'll launch the Zoom app with that meeting. But within Teams, you can also do a Zoom, what's the term they use? Almost like a meet now, like start a meeting now with this particular topic using your own Zoom. So you can do all that within Teams. And the idea is Teams is meant for productivity. So if you don't use our meeting platform, that doesn't mean you have to context switch out of our environment to go to a different place to set up a meeting or get these, how do I do these within this? You can do it inside of Teams through the Zoom application. And actually, on the Zoom website, they do a really good documentation around how to use Zoom inside of Teams.
Okay, sure, thank you. And actually, on that note, similar question asking if Teams works in conjunction with Google Classroom. I think you said earlier that it does, right?
Yes, we actually have a document, and it will be. I think one of my earlier slides is we have gone out and we have invested in documenting what the experience looks like and how you need to configure Google to work with Teams. And that would be, what's the calendaring interop, what's the meeting message, the email interop, and a number of those types of interoperabilities. We have it documented, and it will be shared out as part of the content or the information that's being shared after.
Okay, great. Somebody else asked about the security of Teams. Can you talk about the security aspect of it?
Absolutely. That's one piece I did not touch on, but security to us within Office 365 and Microsoft as a whole is incredibly important. As you would expect with any enterprise-grade solution, because Teams sits on top of O365, all the 40-plus accreditations that are given to Office 365 apply directly to Teams. So whether it's HIPAA, FERPA, a number of ISO accreditations, all of those apply directly to Teams as a client. On top of that, Teams leverages the security stack of O365 inside of Teams. So what do I mean by that? I mean data loss protection. So we want to minimize the leakage of student or PII or patient record information. Teams plugs into our data loss protection stack. If you wanted to do multi-factor authentication, that Teams picks that up, whether you want to allow or not allow guest access. And what I mean by guest access is individuals outside of your organization from being a member of your team. And if you do allow for that, what type of security policies and processes do you have in place to to validate that person is that actual person and that they follow the rules that you have defined for them inside of your organization? E-discovery, legal hold, there's a number of security pieces that plug directly into Teams, and it's not exclusive to Teams. It's actually part of the whole ecosystem of Office 365. A really cool one here, I'll tell you a really quick side story, Kurt. There's a feature called Communication Compliance. It's part of this O365, and what that does, it actually reads team channel meetings and Teams chats meetings, and it uses AI to pick up on sentiment analysis, or is the individual being bullied? How do they feel? And they flag it up to the administrator uh, proactively. It's a really cool use of security within that stack of solutions that I just talked about.
Wow, that's great. Really interesting. Thank you. Uh, let's see. You talked about early on the apps that can integrate within Teams. I think you mentioned just briefly a couple examples like Kaltura for lecture capture or something like that. Are there other higher ed examples how institutions integrate apps like that?
We actually, so within our app store, there are over 300 applications, and education is unique than our enterprise spaces. They actually get an exclusive section called education. So our space for our research side of higher education, our space plugs directly into it, right? We're working very closely with a couple of other ones. I can't say the names on here, obviously, because of the recording, but some other real big, so Kaltura is one of them. Our space, I would say, is another. I'm just trying to quickly, because again, there's so many, so I'm just trying to go through it. Depending on the schools of education, they love using things like Flipgrid and Wakelet. Those are natively plugged into Teams as well. But we also have the flexibility inside of Teams. So if we don't have an app, but there is a web interface, you can pin the website as a tab within your team. Right? So you don't necessarily need an app, but we want to provide that extensibility through pinning a website and saying, oh, look, this is a MATLAB or another website that you can leverage inside of Teams via web UI.
Okay, sure. Sure, thank you. Now, a lot of lecturers, of course, are using PowerPoint in their lectures. So to be clear, in a Teams meeting environment, like a professor giving class, they can both have their webcam and PowerPoint slides and annotate in that interactive whiteboard feature you were talking about.
Yeah, there's as you would expect with any meeting platform, you can share your screen, you can upload a PowerPoint presentation similar to what we've done now. We can do the infinite whiteboard. You can turn on our cameras. We can see each other. There's a chat conversation on the side that's taking place. So just as you would experience most other meeting platforms, that's the same functionality. But then we also go above that where we add things like the live captioning, the blurred background, which some do, some give you, some don't. That's what really differentiates us is our commitment to accessibility. Now, I didn't touch a lot on accessibility, but I feel it is one of our key differentiators in this space. If you look at other demos that are being done, one of the examples that we have is somebody writes in their native language, whether it's Spanish or any other language. Within the context of Teams, we can hover over that text and actually convert that message into English or the language of your machine. So being able to engage with students who either might not feel confident speaking English or who are just quiet and we want to amplify their voice and give them a voice to communicate the way they feel comfortable communicating. We have that ability to translate those posts inside of Teams. Also, a real big differentiator is we plug in a product called Immersive Reader. Immersive Reader is a product that's used across the O365 stack that is used to support individuals with auditory or visual impairments. So they can adjust the size of the text. They can uh, break the words down into parts of speech. They can do line focus on one line or three lines or multiple lines if they need it. They can translate the entire post into a language of their choosing. There's like 180 languages, I believe, or 80 languages. Oh, I got to get the right number. But on top of that, most languages allow for dictation back again, right? So if you're looking for a way, so whether you're worried about, hey, I'm in India, I have a student in India, and I have a student in mainland China, and how do I keep them engaged? How do I make sure that they're communicating? And yes, they may understand my language of English, but we want to really make sure that they feel inclusive. They can translate the entire post. They can get it dictated back to them if they, if they need those resources. That all of that accessibility components are baked into the product itself.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Accessibility is always a hot topic with any of these learning resources that we're talking about. And so, as you were just saying there, somebody had previously asked, I was going to say, is specifically the transcribing, is that available only in English? So, you covered how you can translate into some different languages using some different resources there, right?
Yeah, there's a number of different ways of looking at this. From right now, the meeting transcription and the meeting transcription and live captioning are English only. We do have the ability to translate that within our tool set. The future roadmap is automatic translation. So if we detect if somebody has a machine whose language default is set to simplified Chinese, we will then translate that on the fly for them. Within Microsoft Teams, there are actually two meeting options. One is a Microsoft Teams meeting. That we have a capacity of 250 people within that meeting. That captioning is English only. If you had a large lecture and you needed to accommodate more, we have a meeting type called Microsoft Live Events. Microsoft Live Events will accommodate up to 10,000 participants. And as you set that up, and think of this as a TV production, being able to cut between cameras and different presenters and different content, you can set up and say, these are the 6 languages I want to be able to present to my students to do live captioning or live translation of the content itself. So if you specified Spanish, simplified Cantonese, Urdu, or actually Klingon's listed on that list there, when the students join that live lecture, they'll get the option to enable that live captioning, and then it'll prompt them to say which language do you want it in, so they can pick their language, and they'll get that translated.
Okay. Wow. Pretty impressive, and giving us kind of a glimpse of a little of the future there as well. Interesting. Great. Well, thank you so much. I think we've hit about all of our questions here. Thanks so much to everyone in our audience for your participation. We really appreciate you being a part of our conversation here. On behalf of University Business, everyone here at UB, of course, I'd like to thank Manny. Thanks so much for being with us, sharing your time and expertise with us in these challenging times in higher ed. It's great to be able to access your expertise. And thank you again to our sponsor, Microsoft, for their generous support of our webinar here today. And again, to everyone in our audience, thank you so much for joining us. I do hope you found this webinar informative and useful to you. Producing events like this one is just part of our mission here at UB to inform college and university leaders like you about the latest news and trends in higher ed management. You'll find more coverage about issues such as the ones we looked at here in the pages of our print magazine, as well as our website and digital edition, through additional web seminars like this one, and through our various e-newsletters, which you can sign up for right on our website. And as I mentioned before, for those of you who would like to share the content of this presentation with your colleagues at your institutions, or if you want to go back over it at your own pace to review anything or access any of the links or resources contained in there, we will post the archive recording at the URL on your screen here shortly, as soon as we can. And if you'd like to download the slides to access any of that, you'll also receive a follow-up email with links to the slides as well as the archive recording. So you'll be able to access that, go back over it, share with anyone, any of your colleagues. So that is it for today's event. Once again, I'm Kurt Early for University Business. On behalf of everyone here at UB, goodbye everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much for joining us today.